Earth, as we know it, it's the only home to life in the universe. Millions of years have passed since our planet started. Earth, since then, has already undergone drastic changes before the dawn of humans, dinosaurs, and other prehistoric organisms. Some periods during this time are the Ice Age and cosmic attacks. Over the past 100 million years, organisms continue to increase. Since the beginning, the landscape has given rise to life. Life in turn has defined and redefined the landscape. A perfect harmony of chance and change where innumerable species interacting, sustaining, and driving one another to evolve. Dinosaurs, one of the inhabitants of the Earth which died millions of years ago. They were the dominant terrestrial vertebrates during the Jurassic up to the end of the Cretaceous period. Remnants of these dinosaurs can only be seen as fossils around the world. Among the groups of organisms which data exists from fossil record, the number of species has increased almost continuously. The ocean was home to some of the fiercest and strangest creatures to roam the planet. The prehistoric terrestrial animals are not the only diverse group of organisms, but also the prehistoric marine animals. Many organisms of the marine life have not yet been discovered. Only a gist of marine biodiversity is known. Species richness of fossilized invertebrates has increased in the last 600 million years, with some decline during the Devonian and Permian periods. Vascular land plants increased continuously during the last 400 million years. However, dominating land flora have shifted through time. Early coelopsids went extinct by the end of the Devonian period and were replaced by ferns. This group eventually declined and the diversity of gymnosperms increased. Despite having a history of the Earth's biodiversity to be an increasing trend, it has experienced periods of decline. These declines usually lead to extinctions of some species. The extinctions experienced are not equally distributed across the timeline. It is usually clustered, considering it as mass extinctions due to natural phenomena. Several mammalian species have gone extinct during the Pleistocene period. The giant sloth, the mammoth, and the mastodon. Luba, a 4,000-year-old baby woolly mammoth, is the best preserved and most complete mammoth specimen known. This gave researchers a rare insight of how mammoths behaved. Another animal that vanished from the earth, possibly due to climate changes, as ice sheets advanced and retreated, is the saber-toothed cat. These extinctions of several species of animals on the latter period of history is due to humans. Human activity, such as destruction of animal habitat and hunting, can be attributed to these extinctions. Aside from habitat destruction and hunting, another possible cause would be introduction of predators and parasites, as well as fishing.
Marine environment would refer to bodies of salt water and any plants, animals, and other objects that exist in the body of water. It is diverse and can change rapidly depending on tide waters and currents. They include many unique animals and plants, such as corals and bivalves. There are also many unique habitats that can be found in marine environments. An example would be an underwater volcanoes. Theoretically, the animals evolved in oceans and eventually they immigrated to lands and freshwater environments. In addition, the oceans act like the main regulators of the terrestrial climate and temperature. More than 85% of the oxygen breathed by plants and animals, aquatic and terrestrial, is produced by the vegetal plankton or phytoplankton that dwells in the surface of the oceans. The oceans are also the main source of biotic energy for the survival of the human beings. For marine biologists, it is important to know the scheme of demarcation of ocean. The regions of the marine biome are classified into littoral environment and pelagic biome. Littoral environment is the region comprehended between the limits of the high tide and low tide. Their extension and depth are variable. It is also the region that marks the coastal line. Pelagic biome, on the other hand, extends from the line of the low tide towards the open sea. Its depth is variable. It is also classified into two important regions, the Neretic biome and the Oceanic biome. Neretic biome includes the volume of water between the line of the low tide and the end of the continental shelf. Its extension and depth are variable, but in general, its extension to the open sea is 150 km and about 150 kilometers in depth. The life develops optimally in this environment because its waters are warm and rich in nutrients. The Neretic biome is the richest in living beings zone. Oceanic biome extends from the end of the continental shelf towards the open sea. Like the Neretic biome, the extension and depth of the Oceanic biome are variable. The Oceanic biome reaches 14,000 meters in depth in the oceanic trenches. In vertically or in depth, the marine biomes are subdivided into two main zones. The euphotic environment, which is delimited by the penetration of the light, and the apothic environment, which is determined by the lack of light. Seeing the ocean in the horizontal perspective, there are zones of the sea bottom. First is the benthic littoral zone. Like the littoral environment corresponding to the surface, the littoral benthoic zone extends from the line of the high tide to the line of the low tide. Next is the benthic sublittoral zone or shelf. It is comprehended from the line of the low tide to the edge of the continental shelf. It corresponds to the Neretic biome of the pelagic zone. Another is the bathyal zone. This extends from the limit of the continental shelf and descends in declivity to 4,000 meters in depth. The fourth is the benthic abyssal zone. It is the marine continuation of the marine bottom from 4,000 meters in depth to the bottom of the depressions or trenches. And lastly, the benthic zone, which extends from the edge to the floor of marine trenches. Overall, 98% of the marine living beings inhabit the benthic environment. These organisms were called to be the group of benthos. From these 98%, only 1% live in the depths of more than 2,000 meters. In addition, only 2% of the marine species live in the open sea. These organisms are called to be pelagic organisms. Common classifications of zones are based on physical factors such as depth, light, temperature, salinity, and dissolved nutrients. In every environment, an aspect which also be considered is the relationship between productivity and diversity. In oceans, phytoplanktons and seaweed together are known as autotrophs, that is, organisms that make their own food. Such organisms are also known as primary producers. Organisms that do not make their own food but depend on other organisms to provide nutrients are heterotrophs. Heterotrophs obtain a share of the captured solar energy by consuming autotrophs as well as heterotrophs to support their daily activities. Heterotrophs include primary, secondary, and tertiary consumers. Primary consumers are herbivores, like manatees and zooplanktons, that feed directly on autotrophs. Secondary consumers then feed on primary consumers. The natural chain of nutrient and energy interdependency obtained through food consumption or feeding is known as the food web or food chain. The latitudinal gradients of species richness for marine organisms are similar to those observed for terrestrial organisms. The correlation between patterns of species richness and productivity are not as straightforward as those observed in terrestrial environments. In fact, the general latitudinal gradient of productivity in the oceans is the reverse of that observed on land. Except in the localized areas of upwelling, the primary productivity of oceans increases from the equator to the poles. This relationship suggests an inverse relationship between productivity and diversity. One of the factors influencing local patterns of diversity for pelagic and benthic species is the seasonal fluctuations. Observations show that as the influence of seasonal fluctuations in temperature on primary productivity increases, species richness declines and species dominance increases. In northern latitudes, the seasonal formation and breakdown on the thermocline result in the productivity of surface waters ranging from very high to very low. By contrast, the permanent presence of the thermocline in the tropical ocean waters results in the low but continuous pattern of primary productivity throughout the year. Seasonal variation in the temperature of surface waters functions to increase primary productivity, whereas the lack of seasonal variation functions to support a higher diversity of life. Scientists have hypothesized The geologic history has been an important factor influencing latitudinal patterns of species richness within oceans. Some suggest that glaciation during the Quaternary period may be responsible for lower diversity observed at higher latitudes. As a result, the poleward decline in regional diversity may to some extent represent a recovery from the effects of glaciation. Ecologists define diversity within a community or ecosystem as local or alpha diversity. Quantifying local patterns of diversity is hindered by difficulties in defining community boundaries. In addition, the relationship between species diversity and area makes it difficult to compare patterns of species diversity among communities and ecosystems that differ in size. Local pattern of plant and animal diversity also change over time during succession, further compounding the difficulty of comparing the communities. Total species diversity or species richness across all communities within a geographic area is called regional or gamma diversity. Comparison of these broad-scale patterns of diversity at the continental and global scale can be confounded by time. Changes in regional diversity also occur over geologic timescales. Over timescales of tens of millions to hundreds of millions of years, evolution drives changes in patterns of diversity through the emergence and extinction of species. On a timescale of thousands to tens of thousands of years, changes in climate have influenced regional patterns of diversity by shifting the geographic ranges of species. Possible change in geographic distributions of plant and animal species in response to future changes in Earth climate is a key area of research.